As is the case with the world at the moment, there are yet more things on the internet to outrage us. And this clip is the perfect example of that. We're going to watch it and then we're going to unpack it and we're going to try and understand it.
What do you mean we're lucky to be white?
It's not luck, it's privilege.
We're privileged that people see us, not a color.
Privilege that we don't get stared at when we walk into the room.
Privilege that we don't get followed by security when we go shopping.
Or pulled over when we're in the wrong neighborhood.
We're privileged because society was set up for us, and our silence keeps it in place.
We're privileged, and that's unfair.
The transcript, first of all. What do you mean we're lucky to be white? It's not luck, it's privilege. Who is saying that out loud in real life, in your day-to-day life, when you're chatting with your pals? Do you ever say, God, blimey, I tell you what, we are and half lucky to be white, aren't we? Aren't we just so fortunate and lucky to be white? And then one of your friends turns around and says, no, it's not luck, it's privilege. And then you say, oh, yeah, silly me, it's privilege. It just doesn't happen, ever. Nobody, and even people that have a different colour skin, do they really walk around going, oh, God, I've woken up and I'm black again. Oh, for God's sake. Oh, look at those fortunate, lucky white people. Oh, if only I could be like them. Oh, with privilege, the people see us not as a colour. Do you understand? Do you think they understand the contradiction in that? In the fact that that's exactly what they're doing. They are pointing out with a colour. Privilege that we don't get stared at when we walk into a room. Who's doing the staring? When people of a different race walk in, is everyone like... Do you know what I mean? Who's doing the staring? That's all I want to know. Who is doing the staring? Privileged that we don't get followed by security when we go shopping or pulled over when we're in the wrong neighbourhood. What is the wrong neighbourhood? What are these people saying here? The underlying premise, the underlying assumption here is that there is such a thing as the wrong neighbourhood, and that the wrong neighbourhood in our case would be the black neighbourhood or the brown neighbourhood, and that the wrong neighbourhood to the black people and the brown people is the white neighbourhood. We're privileged because society was set up for us and our silences keep it in place. We're privileged, and that's unfair. Aside from it being completely self-indulgent and unbearable, I always like to look at these things from the perspective of, yeah, it's absurd that it's happening now, but when we look back 500 years ago at some of the crazy things that were happening in this country, for example, the UK, we'd look at things like witch trials, the fact that we burned women and girls alive at the stake, and that the people that were doing that believed they were carrying out God's work and that they were doing a genuinely good thing. And it's always the do-gooders. It's always the do-gooders that you've got to look out for. And so 500 years from now, assuming we're still around, how will this be viewed? Well, I think before we dissect it and ask some key questions, we need to define and understand the foundations of where this is coming from. So this type of ideology, completely untested in the real world and perpetuated in the echo chambers of academia, is especially prevalent in affluent, middle-class, liberal cohorts, specifically white liberal women. I would say even more specifically, unhappy white middle-class liberal women that have branded every male as toxic and indulge in this vying for virtue signalling and complete fashionable nonsense known as white privilege. This type of ideology, this utter twaddle, doesn't peter out and become fringe like it should do because it's utter nonsense. It's reinforced and recirculated, and actually what happens is people double down and they start treating it as though it's fact, which means that media consumption is highly personalized and highly precise. The craziest thing about this for me is that this is perpetrated racism. It's racism perpetrated by their own kind, but it has to be called out. So the question is why? Why? And the answer is always incentive. Whenever you're trying to understand behavior, you have to understand the underlying incentive for exhibiting that behavior. If you're a salesperson and you work to earn commission, you will adopt certain behavior and traits that maximize your potential for earning commission. It's a simple behavioral structure. It's the same here. The commission in this example is status. And these people are swept up by the romance of the civil rights movement. Never-ending movies and TV shows and series about that movement, especially post-2020, have led people to believe they're living in some sort of parallel reality where their plight is the same as the plight of those 60, 65 years ago. And these modern liberals, they cast themselves as moral warriors, similar to those that they worship from that particular movement. And that particular movement, it had a legitimacy, I would argue. So some key questions then. Who benefits socially from adopting this guilt narrative? One of the key things to understand with virtue signaling. And actually, first of all, let's define what is virtue signaling. Well, virtue signaling is simply displaying that you have the right opinions or values in the absence of any consequences for having those opinions and values. It's the performative action of displaying that you have the right thoughts and opinions in order to acquire status and validation from those around you. And so who benefits socially from this fashionable nonsense? Well, the people that get the white people that perpetuate this crap, they get to simultaneously cast themselves as the victims and the champions. How do they cast themselves as the champion? How do they cast themselves as the victims? Well, it's a victim mindset to say, first of all, we are so terrible, everything we've done is so terrible, we deserve not your forgiveness, the world is an awful place because of what we've done, we are awful. That's a victim mindset. You're also, though, casting people of different races and ethnicities as victims, because what you're saying is, they don't have the ability to do anything for themselves because we've already ruined the world. But then they get to cast themselves as the champions. But how are they champions? Well, they get to be champions because they get to be the ones to atone for these terrible sins. It's perfect, really, for them. And so the next question is, what personal cost do they actually incur for holding these beliefs? And the answer is absolutely no personal cost whatsoever, because they get to draw on their faces and do their white privilege performance. But they get to go home to their nice, comfortable houses and live, and have their nice holidays, and go to work, have their nice cars. Nothing whatsoever about their life changes in any meaningful way. It's not like you look at the actual civil rights movement, there was a high degree of personal cost to people. I mean, Martin Luther King, the ultimate cost for him was he was assassinated. But it's the opposite for these people. It's the opposite of cost. These people gain and acquire status among their contemporaries for holding these views. It's all about social validation, nothing more, nothing less. And so if there is no cost, is it a real cause? I often wonder, what would these people actually do if, we suddenly enacted laws that meant that they were no longer able to own property, or they had to sit in a different area to everybody else to truly atone for the sins of their white privilege. And the next question that we need to ask is, how do algorithms intensify and reinforce these moral narratives? It's fascinating, really, when you think, especially when we're examined 500 years from now, when hopefully we've risen out of this mess we find ourselves in. It would be fascinating to understand how they study us. I'm reading a book at the moment about the city of Amsterdam, the incredible story of Amsterdam. And it's fascinating to understand how these people lived. And they lived the way they lived because they knew no better. One particular fascinating story concerns Dr. Tulp, which is the Dutch word for tulip, who was considered to be, at the time, Amsterdam's most prominent physician. And Amsterdam's most prominent physician refused to believe that blood was circulated from the heart. He believed it was circulated from the liver and somewhere else. It was circulated from two places. And this is the logic that underpinned bleeding as a practice. A god-awful affair. I mean, to be honest, living in the 17th century anywhere, the last thing you would want if you were ill would be to go to a doctor, because it would certainly finish you off. But we look back at that now and we think, wow, how did they not know? It's so obvious that that blood is pumped from the heart, that the heart pumps blood. But they're going to look back at the algorithm or the nature of social media, because we're going to make a discovery in about 5 minutes that's going to show people are being acutely brainwashed by nonsense ideology that reinforces the utter garbage that is white privilege and others. I mean, critical race theory, there's a whole debate on trans, all of it. And finally, just to re-examine what incentives sustain and spread this worldview. We've already touched on the behavioral incentives for earning social capital, status, validation. But it's also true that, you know, if you don't subscribe to these views, there's the potential for excommunication. It's certainly true that in most corporate workplaces now, gender ideology must be subscribed to, or you can find yourself fired. Your livelihood is under attack. And there is a degree of that with this type of ideology. It's not just underpinned by the natural desire to want to increase one's status and validation in the social circle. It's also underpinned by one's desire to not be removed from social circles and regular life. Not only that, but there's complete institutional capture on this. In the UK, whether it's the government, the NHS, education, councils, they've all adopted this ideology. They all espouse it as fact. And so to go against it is to go against the institutions. Entirely captured are the institutions of this country. But I genuinely and wholeheartedly believe not for long. It just requires a bit of common sense and bravery to call it out for the bollocks that it is. I mean, you know, I guess maybe I'm fortunate in the sense that the people around me in the real world have just come to expect I'm a contrarian on these types of issues. Most people, though, when you speak to them, will say, well, yeah, I know, it is a bit silly, isn't it? I don't want the hassle. I don't want the hassle. I understand that, but we're on the mother of all slippery slopes right now. And the only people that can stop it are us, regular people. So undermine it, be snidey, be sarcastic, be British.